Everyone in Chicago knew better than to say the name Marchetti above a whisper. Judges said it carefully. Cops said it off the record. Dead men, according to the stories, had said it once too loudly in the wrong room and never said anything again. Cassio Marchetti had not been wrong about a human being in 30 years. It was the foundation his empire stood on, the thing that kept him alive while other bosses went into trunks and rivers, his cold, perfect arithmetic of people. So when he looked down a candlelit table of armed elites at his daughter's quiet best friend, the broke little art cleaner in the second-hand dress and the drugstore watch, and decided to use her as a pawn to humiliate his enemies, he was certain of exactly what she was. Harmless, ordinary, the help. It was the last easy mistake of his life. Because the night Cassio Marchetti put Nora Quinn on the board like a pawn, he unknowingly challenged the most dangerous woman in the room. Within 14 days, she would bring the most feared family on the rival side of the city to its knees, expose a traitor 22 years deep inside his own house, and do the one thing no woman in America had managed in over a decade. She would make the boss himself fall, completely, catastrophically, in love. He knew her name. He had known it secretly for 15 years. He never knew what she was, and by the time he learned, everything had become complicated. Nora restored paintings for a living. It was careful, invisible work, and she was good at it in the way people are good at things they learned out of grief. Her father had taken her to the Art Institute every Sunday until she was 11, and then one night he didn't come home, and the museum was the only place that still smelled like him. So she made a life out of standing very close to beautiful things that belonged to other people. It paid almost nothing. Her studio apartment in Pilsen had a radiator that clanked like a man kicking a pipe, and a landlord who had stopped fixing things sometime during the Obama administration. And on the first of every month, she moved numbers between accounts the way other people moved chess pieces, always 3 moves from losing. The morning before she left, she'd gone to see Merck, the old conservator she freelanced under, to borrow a portable UV lamp and a case of Belgian swabs. Merck had survived 2 divorces, 1 embassy posting, and 40 years of handling other people's masterpieces, and Nora had never seen his hands shake. They shook when she told him where the job was. "Say the name again," Merck said. "Marchetti. It's a private collection on the Wisconsin shore. It's my best friend's family, Merck. I've known her 8 years." The old man set the lamp back on the shelf. He crossed the studio, turned the sign on the door to closed at 10 in the morning, and came back and took both her hands in his shaking ones. 1991, I authenticated a Gardaí for a man on Taylor Street, he said. 1 time, 1 painting. For 6 years after, every Christmas, an envelope came to the studio with no return address, and I never opened one, and I moved twice, and the envelopes always found me. That family does not have guests, Nora. It has assets and it has liabilities, and the moment you walk through that gate, you had better already know which one you are. He squeezed her hands once and let go. Take the lamp, don't take a check. And if anyone in that house asks you what you saw paintings. She'd laughed it off on the train north. She stopped laughing at the gate. Bianca had swept into her life during sophomore year of college like weather. She was loud where Nora was quiet, gold where Nora was gray, and she had claimed the seat next to Nora in an art history lecture with the confidence of a woman claiming territory. Within a month, they were inseparable. Within a year, Nora could not remember what her life had looked like before. Bianca never talked about money, which meant she had endless amounts of it. She never talked about her mother, who was dead. And she never, ever talked about her father except to say he traveled, he worried, and he would love Nora someday when the time was right. 8 years. The time apparently was now right. 2 weeks, Bianca had said, sitting cross-legged on Nora's bed while the radiator kicked and clanked. The lake house. Before the engagement party, I need you there, Nor. I can't do the dress fittings and the seating charts and the Falcon people without you. I will actually lose my mind. You have a lake house. My father has a lake house. Bianca examined her nails, which were perfect. My father has a lot of things. She said it lightly. Nora would remember later how lightly she said it. The estate sat on the shore behind a wall that was tasteful the way a bank vault is tasteful. The gate took a full 10 seconds to open, and in those 10 seconds, Nora counted 3 cameras and 2 men who were pretending to garden. The men did not look at her the way gardeners look at guests. They looked at her the way her father used to look at parked cars on their street, cataloging, dismissing, filing away. One of them said something low to the other in Italian, and both of them smiled, and neither smile reached anything. Neither of them bothered to run her bag. The house itself stopped her breath in her chest. Limestone and glass, cedar and copper gone green, 100 feet of terrace pouring down toward water that held the last of the sunset like something spilled. Staff moved through the grounds in silent choreography. Somewhere a fountain ran. Somewhere else a dog barked twice and went quiet fast, as if corrected. "Home sweet home," Bianca said and squeezed her hand. That first night, Nora couldn't sleep. The guest room was bigger than her apartment, the sheets were softer than anything she owned, and the silence was so complete it rang. At 2 in the morning she gave up, pulled a sweater over her pajamas, and went looking for water. She found the library instead. The room ran the length of the west wing, 2 stories of books behind glass, a fireplace tall enough to stand in. And above the fireplace, lit by a single brass lamp someone had left burning, hung a painting that made her forget she had a body. It was a small oil, 17th century by the crackalure, a woman in dark silk turning from a window. The varnish had yellowed to amber, and water damage bloomed up the lower left corner like a bruise, and beneath all that neglect the brushwork was extraordinary alive, the silk almost audible. Nora climbed onto the raised hearth without thinking, the stone cold through her socks, and leaned in close enough to fog the surface with her breath. Most people ask before they climb on the furniture. The voice came from the dark end of the room, low, unhurried, faintly amused. Nora turned so fast she nearly went off the hearth. A man sat in the leather chair by the window with a book closed over one finger, watching her. Silver threaded through black hair. A face built out of hard angles that had somehow arranged themselves into something worth looking at, and eyes so dark the lamplight fell into them and did not come back out. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled, and he was peeling an orange, and he was doing it in one long, unbroken spiral, the way you'd diffuse something. Her stomach dropped through the floor of the house and kept going, because she knew that trick with the orange. She had watched her father do it 100 Sunday mornings, the peel curling off in a single ribbon while he told her only patient men get it in one piece, Nora Bird, and she had not seen anyone do it since he died. "I'm sorry," she said. "I couldn't sleep, the painting." The painting. He set the orange down on a white napkin, peel coiled beside it like a shed skin. "What about it?" "It's dying." The words came out before she could dress them up. "The varnish is strangling it, and that water damage is active. It's still moving. Someone hung a Gentileschiskool oil above a working fireplace, and it is dying up there, and it's—" She stopped, breathed. "It's a crime, sir." Silence stretched across the length of the library. Then the man laughed, once, quietly, as if laughing were a currency he didn't spend often, and when he spoke again the amusement in it had an edge she'd learned to recognize later, the indulgence of a very large animal watching a very small one bare its teeth. "So you're the friend," he said. "8 years my daughter has been telling me about the girl who cleans paintings, her little stray." He stood, and the room got smaller. He was taller than she'd assumed, and he moved the way the gardeners had looked at her with a stillness underneath, something folded away. He stopped at polite distance and looked her over the way the men at the gate had, dress, socks, the battered watch. An inventory that took 2 seconds and filed her somewhere small. "I expected someone meeker. I did not expect someone who diagnoses my house from the furniture." "You're Bianca's father." "Cassio." He studied the painting over her shoulder. "It was my wife's. It came with her from Naples when we married. I am told the damage happened during a move 15 years ago. I have never had the heart to let anyone touch it." "Whoever told you that lied," Nora said. "This isn't moving damage. Water came from behind from the wall side over months. Look at the tide lines." He looked at her instead, longer this time, the way a man rechecks a sum that came out wrong. Then the look closed, and the indulgence came back down over it like a shutter, and he was only a rich man humoring the help again. "Bianca says you're the best in the city." "Bianca exaggerates." "Bianca lies beautifully about unimportant things and never about important ones," Cassio said. "It's a family trait. Very well, restore it. Whatever you need, whatever it costs. You'll stay the 2 weeks anyway. You can be useful while my daughter plans her wedding." It was not an offer. It was the way a man orders a hedge trimmed. Her mouth was already forming the shape of no, out of pride, out of some animal instinct that said this man's debts are not like other debts. What came out was, "The materials alone will run $4,000. I said whatever it costs." He picked up the orange and the coil of peel and moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame, not looking back. "You went straight to the painting. Not the rugs, not the first editions, not the Fabergé nonsense in the hall my wife's mother left us. The one thing in this house that's actually priceless. Interesting for a girl who's never owned anything." The word girl landed the way he meant it to. She lifted her chin at his back anyway. "Is it?" she said. Mildly. Now he did look back, and for half a second something that was not indulgence crossed the dark of his eyes and was folded away before she could read it. "Good night, Miss Quinn." He was gone before she noticed what he'd called her. Miss Quinn. She hadn't told him her last name. She stood on the cold hearth for a long time after, heart going hard, telling herself it was the painting. The days found a rhythm. Mornings, she worked in the library with the smell of solvent and cotton wool, lifting 50 years of amber varnish off the dying woman in silk 1 square inch at a time. And it was the best work of her life because the painting underneath was better than anyone knew. Afternoons belonged to Bianca, dress fittings and cake tastings and seating charts. Bianca bright and brittle, and drinking a little more than Nora remembered her drinking. Evenings, the household gathered for dinners that felt like state functions with better food. And threaded through all of it, Cassio. He came to the library every day. Never long, never announced. He came, she understood, the way a man checks on a hired crew, and he stayed, she noticed, longer than checking required. He would stand at her shoulder while she worked and ask questions that began as tests and kept forgetting to stay tests, about pigment and intention, and why the artist had turned the woman's face 3 degrees away from the light. He knew art the way self-taught men know things, hungrily, with strange gaps. He argued with her about Caravaggio. He lost the argument and looked briefly, genuinely irritated, and then looked at her like a sum that came out wrong again and left without finishing his espresso. He was amused by her, she decided. Powerful men kept small, fierce things around for amusement. She told herself she minded more than she did, and once, when she glanced over mid-sentence, he was watching her hands move over the canvas with an attention that had nothing amused in it at all, and the air in the room changed pressure, and both of them pretended it hadn't. "Your watch runs fast," he said one afternoon out of nothing. Nora's hand went still over the canvas. The watch was her father's, a battered Hamilton on a leather strap gone soft as skin, and it ran exactly 4 minutes fast because her father had said it that way, and she had never, in 15 years, allowed anyone to correct it. "I know," she said. "You could have it fixed." "It isn't broken." Cassio looked at the watch for a moment longer than the sentence needed. Something crossed the dark of his eyes and was folded away before she could read it. "No," he said. "I suppose it isn't." On the 6th night, the rhythm cracked. She woke at 3 to an engine on the gravel and went to her window, because the guest wing looked out over the service court, and there was a black sedan below with its headlights off and its trunk open, and 2 of the gardeners who were not gardeners were lifting something out of it that was long and heavy and wrapped in painter's plastic. She watched them carry it into the boathouse. She watched a 3rd man come out 10 minutes later, uncoil a hose, and rinse the gravel where the trunk had stood, working the water back and forth in the dark with the calm of a man watering roses. Then the court was empty and clean, and the fountain ran, and the house was beautiful again. Nora stood at the window until her feet went numb on the cold floor. Then she got back into the enormous bed and stared at the ceiling and conducted the trial. He is your best friend's father. He is 50 if he's a day. He thinks you're the help. He called you a stray. There are men with guns pretending to garden outside, and cars arrive at 3 in the morning with their headlights off. And tonight a man hosed the gravel, and you have decided not to wonder about any of it because his voice does something to the base of your spine. The prosecution rested. The defense said he peels oranges like your father did, and she had no answer for that at all. She noticed more after that, because noticing was her profession and fear had sharpened it. She noticed that the staff never turned their backs to Cassio, that a room straightened when he entered it the way soldiers straighten. She noticed the chapel on the north lawn, small and old, and always with fresh white flowers, and the groundskeeper crossing himself when he passed it. She noticed Bianca's phone buzzing constantly, and Bianca taking the calls out on the terrace with her back to the glass. She noticed a man named Renzo, silver-haired and soft-spoken, Cassio's shadow at every dinner, who smiled at everyone with his mouth and audited everyone with his eyes, whose shoes cost more than her rent, and who had looked at Nora exactly once, the first night, the way a butcher looks at a hanging side of beef. She filed it all somewhere she didn't visit. Then the Falcons came, and the filing system burned down. Dario Falcone arrived on a Thursday in a convoy of 3 black Range Rovers, and the house changed temperature before he was through the gate. He was handsome the way a knife is handsome, 35 maybe, dressed in gray cashmere, and he came up the steps 2 at a time and caught Bianca around the waist and kissed her, and Nora watched her best friend's hands stay flat and still against his chest the whole time, not gripping, not moving, like hands on a wall. The famous Nora. Dario turned to her with his arms still around Bianca. His eyes did a slow inventory, dress, shoes, watch, and his smile arrived a half-second late. Bianca talks about you so much I feel I already own a piece of you. Funny, Nora said. She's never mentioned you at all. The smile flickered. Beside him, so briefly Nora almost missed it, Bianca's mouth twitched toward something real and then went smooth again. Dinner that night was 17 people. Falcone men and Marchetti men interleaved down the long table like alternating currents, and the pleasantness in the room was the pleasantness of a drawn weapon. Dario's uncle Vittorio sat at the far end opposite Cassio, an old man with a young man's restless hands, and the two of them toasted each other's health with a tenderness that made the hair stand up on Nora's arms. Dario spent the appetizers being charming, and the entrees being cruel. It started small, the way it always starts small. He asked Nora where she'd summered as a child, and let the silence sit when she said Michigan in an apartment. He asked what she drove, and repeated the answer, the train, to the table, wonderingly, like a man handling a folk artifact. By the main course he had found the watch. Now this is my favorite thing in the house. He reached across Bianca without asking and lifted Nora's wrist off the table, turning it in the candlelight so the whole table could admire the battered Hamilton, the strap gone soft and dark with 15 years of wear. Gentlemen, look at this. My future wife's dearest friend. And she's wearing a dead man's drugstore watch that doesn't even keep time. He checked it against his own, gold, Swiss, the size of an ashtray. 4 minutes fast. Sweetheart, you're in the one house in America that can afford you a working watch. Laughter went down the Falcone side of the table like a lit fuse. One of the wives hid her smile in her wineglass and didn't hide it well. Nora slid her wrist free without hurry and said nothing, because there was nothing to say at a table like this, and hated the heat climbing her neck, the old, familiar arithmetic of being the poorest person in the room, done at her expense, out loud. And from the head of the table, Cassio watched it happen and did nothing at all. Worse than nothing. When the laughter thinned, he dabbed his mouth with his napkin, unhurried, and said mildly to the table at large, Miss Quinn is my daughter's guest. She cleans paintings. A beat perfectly weighted. Someone has to. The Falcone side loved that. Even 2 of his own men smiled into their plates. It was small and elegant, and it filed her in front of 34 eyes exactly where he had filed her the first night. The stray, the help, the girl who'd never owned anything. And Nora sat very still with her father's watch ticking 4 minutes ahead of the room, and understood that whatever the library had felt like at 2 in the morning, at this table she was furniture, and he had just said so with a smile. Bianca's knuckles had gone white around her fork. Nora, under the table, pressed her friend's knee once. Not now. The gift came in with dessert, and with it, the trap he built for her without knowing he was building it. 2 of Dario's men carried the crate, unpacked it, and raised the painting on an easel at the center of the room with theater. An oil, a harbor scene, boats and dawn light, and Dario stood beside it with a glass in hand, and his arms sweeping like an auctioneer. "A Vernet, 1754. My father acquired it many years ago, and it is our honor to return beauty to a house that has known so much loss." He tipped the glass toward Cassio, and the toast underneath the toast was audible to everyone. "To the joining of families." Glasses rose down the table. Cassio inclined his head with a courtesy that gave away nothing, and looked at the painting a long moment, and Nora watched a thought move behind his eyes, watched him make a decision the way she'd learned he made all his decisions, completely, instantly, coldly. He wanted to needle the falcons. He wanted the vulgarity of the gesture, 8 figures on an easel like a game show, answered in kind. And he had, conveniently, at his table, a toy for exactly this. "Miss Quinn," he didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. The room turned toward her with him. "You clean paintings. Come tell us whether my future-in-law's gift needs dusting before I hang it." The falcon's side laughed again, easier now, delighted, the boss trotting out the help. Dario's grin went wide and generous, a lord tossing coin. "Yes, come, sweetheart, you'll never be this close to 8 figures again." Somewhere down the table, a man murmured something in Italian and got a snicker. Bianca had gone to porcelain. Every person in that room understood the move, Marchetti answering Falcone Theater with casual contempt, the priceless gift handed to the girl in the second-hand dress like a coat to be checked. And every person in that room expected the same thing, 30 seconds of mumbled politeness from a frightened nobody. And the point made, and the pawn returned to its square. Nora looked down the table at Cassio Marchetti, the man who came to her library every day and forgot to leave, the man who had just called her a duster in front of both families, and something her father used to say rose in her quiet and clean. "They'll always tell you what they think you are, Nora Bird. You never have to agree." She stood. She crossed the silence to the easel, and she looked because he had, after all, invited her to look. The brushwork on the sails was right. The signature was right. And then her training stood up inside her like a dog hearing a sound above human register, because the craquelure was wrong, too even, too obedient, cracks that had been baked instead of earned. And under the smell of old varnish there was another smell, faint as a lie, of modern alkyd resin, and the light on the water had been painted by someone thinking very hard about water. The room waited for its 30 seconds of mumbling. "Where's the export documentation?" Nora asked. The laughter thinned. Dario's glass paused. "I'm sorry." A vernet of this size, sold at auction or moved privately, travels with a paper trail. Sale records, condition reports, export stamps if it left Europe. "Where is it?" She leaned close to the lower right corner, to the signature, and there was the final tell, the exhaustion missing, the places where a real artist stops caring for 3 brushstrokes because his hand knows the water so well it paints itself. She straightened up, and her voice came out of her flat and certain into a room going quiet by degrees. "The craquelure is baked. The varnish is sitting on alkyd resin that didn't exist before 1960. The canvas is period, which means somebody sacrificed a real, worthless 17th century painting to counterfeit a priceless one, and they were brilliant, and they failed, because forgers can copy everything except boredom. This was made in the last 10 years. She turned. She looked past 17 frozen faces, past Dario, all the way down the table to the man at the head of it, and gave him back his own mild voice. "It doesn't need dusting. It needs a grand jury. You're toasting the joining of families over a forgery." Nobody laughed now. Nobody moved. 17 people sat in a room built for murder disguised as dinner, and the only sound was old Vittorio's fork, set down with terrible gentleness. And at the head of the table, Cassio Marchetti sat absolutely still, and Nora watched 30 years of perfect arithmetic fail in a man's eyes in real time. He had put a pawn on the board. Something else entirely was standing in the middle of his dining room, and every man at that table had watched him not know what it was. His knife lay where it had stopped on his plate. He looked at her fully, for the first time since the gate guards hadn't bothered with her bag. And what was in his face wasn't indulgence and wasn't amusement, and it would take her days to name it because she had never before watched a king recalculate. Dario's face went through its options and landed on delight, which frightened her more than rage would have. He drifted toward her, glass loose in his hand, and dropped his voice into a register meant for 2. Careful, little mouse. Men have lost hands in this state for touching what's mine. What do you suppose they lose for calling a falcon a liar in front of both families? Enough. Cassio had not raised his voice. He had not stood. But the word crossed the room like weather changing, and Dario stepped back from her a full pace before he seemed to realize he'd done it. Miss Quinn's eye is in my employ, Cassio said, and folded his napkin with unhurried hands, and if his voice was smooth, Nora was close enough now to see what the table couldn't, that his thumb pressed a crease into the linen and pressed it again, a man buying his own composure by the second. Which makes her assessment my assessment. Vittorio, your nephew's gift appears to have been switched somewhere between your vault and my table. I'm certain you'll want to look into how that happened. A pause, silk over a blade. Families about to be joined shouldn't keep mysteries from each other. Old Vittorio's restless hands had gone very still. No, he said, they shouldn't. The dinner reassembled itself around the crater. Conversation restarted in careful, load-bearing sentences, but the room had reorganized itself and everyone in it knew it. Boss had trotted out the help to dust a painting, and the help had walked to the center of the floor and detonated 8 figures with her bare eye. And the boss had been wrong about a person in front of both families. And twice before dessert ended, Nora looked up and found Cassio already looking at her. That recalculating stillness. And once she looked up and found Renzo doing it instead. The consigliere with his kind mouth and his auditing eyes, and his expression was doing arithmetic she could not see. Bianca caught her wrist in the hallway after. Her grip was too tight and her lipstick was fresh, that same shade of red, always the same shade, and up close her eyes were shining in a way that had nothing to do with tears. You beautiful idiot, Bianca whispered. Do you have any idea what you just did? Your father told me to look at a painting. I looked at a painting. There is no such thing. Bianca said, as looking at a painting, not in this house. She pressed her forehead briefly to Nora's, an old gesture, college, cheap wine, 100 midnights, and her hand shook doing it. Stay away from Dario. Promise me. Whatever happens these next 2 weeks, whatever you see, stay near my father or stay near me and stay away from Dario Falcone. Bianca, what is happening in this house? For one unguarded second, her best friend looked at her the way you look at something you're about to spend. It was gone so fast Nora told herself she'd invented it. A wedding, Bianca said, and smiled with her mouth and left her in the hallway. Nora went back to the library because it was the only room where the world made sense, and that was where he found her, past midnight, kneeling on the hearth in front of the dying woman in silk with her cleaning swabs untouched beside her. Cassio came in without a sound and set 2 glasses of wine on the work table and lowered himself onto the raised hearth beside her, on the stone, in his dinner suit, like it cost him nothing. Up close he smelled of cedar and orange peel and the cold air of the terrace. For a while he didn't speak, which she would learn was rare and was itself a confession. I called you a duster tonight, he said finally, in front of 30 people. I put you on that floor the way a man puts down a card to irritate a falcon because you were the cheapest piece I had in reach and the insult was the point. He said it evenly, eyes on the dark where the fire had been, a man reading an inventory of damage aloud because he deserved to hear it. I have not been wrong about a person in 30 years, Nora. Men are alive because of that arithmetic. Men are dead because of it. It is the only thing I have ever fully trusted, and tonight I watched it fail in front of both families, and here is what you should understand about what that did to every man in that room. He turned his head and looked at her, and the shudder was gone, and what had been behind it all along was hunger and alarm in equal measure. They watched me learn something at my own table. Renzo has not seen that happen since before my wife died. Vittorio will be awake tonight, recalculating everything he thought he knew about this house because of you, and he stopped. His jaw worked once, and when he went on, the sentence had lost its architecture. I came down here to apologize, which I have not done aloud in, I don't know, years. And instead I find I want to ask you how you saw it, the resin, the boredom. I want to. 30 years I have known what everything costs. Everything, every man, every favor, every square foot of this city, and I look at you and the number won't. There's no number. I don't know what you cost. He set the glass down harder than he meant to, and the stem sang. I was wrong about you in front of armed men, and it should be the most dangerous thing that's happened to me this year. and instead I keep. I find I don't care, and that frightens me more than any man at that table ever has. She should have said any of the sensible things. Bianca, the age, the gardeners with guns, the word duster. You peel oranges in one spiral, is what she said. Her voice cracked doing it. My father used to do that. Only patient men get it in one piece. He died when I was 11 and I have never seen anyone do it since. And the first night when you did it, why do you do that? Who taught you to do that? Something happened to his face. Later, she would spend hours trying to name it, and the closest she ever got was that it was the face of a man who has rehearsed for a moment and is devastated to find the rehearsal useless. Nora, he said very quietly. Who taught you? A friend, he said. A long time ago, a patient man. He reached out and touched her jaw, just his fingertips, careful as she was careful with 400-year-old paint, and she stopped breathing entirely, and the space between them had a gravity to it now, actual physics, and his thumb traced the line of her cheekbone once. Then he stood, stepped back, put the room between them with 2 strides, a man dragging himself off a rail line. Finish the painting, he said, rougher than she'd ever heard him. And then, if you have any mercy in you at all, go home and forget this house. He left her by the coals with 2 full glasses of wine and a heart going like a hammer, and she pressed her hand flat against her sternum and understood, with the clarity of a diagnosis, that she was not going to be able to forget this house. Which was, of course, precisely when the house stopped letting her pretend. It happened 4 nights later, past 3 in the morning. She'd fallen asleep over her notes and woke with a solvent headache and went down the back stairs for air. The servant's route Bianca had shown her years ago, and the route ran past the door to the old boathouse, and the door was open, and there was light on the water side and voices. She should have turned around. She knew, even as her feet moved, that a smarter woman would turn around. Through the gap in the door she saw the boathouse's interior, ropes and hulls and gasoline shadows, work lights strung overhead. She saw 2 of the gardeners who were not gardeners standing over a man tied to a chair. The man's face had been ruined. His shirt was a butcher's apron. And she saw Renzo, silver-haired and soft-spoken, in his shirt sleeves and gloves, crouched to the ruined man's eye level with the tenderness of a family doctor. Once more, Renzo said pleasantly, who has the Quinn ledger? Every organ Nora owned turned to ice water. The man in the chair mumbled something wet. Renzo sighed like a disappointed teacher and stood and nodded to the 2 men, and Nora's body took over and got her back up the stairs on animal autopilot, no memory of climbing, her back against her locked door and her father's watch ticking 4 minutes fast against her hammering wrist. The Quinn ledger. Quinn. Her father, Detective Thomas Quinn, Chicago PD organized crime, dead 15 years. A hit and run, they'd said. No driver ever found. She was 11, and the men at the funeral wore their guns to the graveside, and her mother had moved them to Michigan within a month and never spoke of Chicago again without her jaw going tight. Nora didn't sleep. At dawn, she was still sitting against the door, and her whole gilded month rearranged itself in her skull piece by piece, the 8-year friendship, the scholarship that had arrived out of nowhere her freshman year from a foundation she'd never applied to, the invitation, the library, the man with the orange, Miss Quinn, before she'd given her name. Your watch runs fast. A friend taught me, a patient man, and underneath all of it, tonight in a boathouse that smelled of gasoline. Her murdered father's name in the mouth of a torturer. She did not run. She wanted that understood by whatever part of herself kept the record. She thought about running, and instead she washed her face and put on her work clothes and walked into the library at 8 in the morning where Cassio stood at the window with his coffee, and she shut the double doors behind her. Tell me about the Quinn ledger, she said. His cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down. In the wrong light, for a second, he looked every year of his age. Who, he said, and it came out with the calm of a man checking a wound, said those words to you? Renzo, in the boathouse, at 3 this morning to a man he was taking apart. Her voice was doing things she couldn't fix, splitting on the consonants. 15 years, Cassio. My father is 15 years dead, and I watched a man get tortured over his name 100 feet from where I sleep, so you're going to tell me right now. Did you know who I was? Before the library, before any of it, did you know? Yes. The word went through her like a blade so sharp you only feel the cold. How long? Nora. How long? Since always, Cassio said. Since you were 11 years old. The room tilted. She put her hand on the worktable among her swabs and solvents and held on. Sit down, he said gently. I'll stand. He nodded, accepting terms. Then he walked to the shelf and took down a book that was not a book and set an old tin box on the table between them and opened it. And Nora looked down at a photograph of 2 young men on a pier with a stringer of lake trout, laughing, and one of them was a black-haired boy who would become the most feared man in Chicago, and the other one was her father. Her hand went to her mouth. That's 1988, Kenosha. Cassio touched the photograph's edge and did not pick it up. Tommy Quinn was my friend for 20 years, before he was police. We came up on the same block. His mother fed me when mine couldn't. I taught him to. The orange, Nora said. The orange. His hand curled closed on the table. He was 14. He kept tearing the peel and I kept telling him, patience, patience, and one morning he did it in one piece and held it up like a trophy fish, and after that it was his. He did it better than me. He did most things better than me, which is why it should have been. He stopped, started again lower. When he took the badge, we should have become enemies. Instead, we became something there's no word for. He worked me. I worked him. Both of us used the other to burn down men worse than we were. And Nora, there were many, many men worse than we were. You're telling me my father, a decorated. She had to stop and press her knuckles to her lips. You're telling me he was dirty. I'm telling you he was the cleanest man I ever knew, and clean isn't the same as simple. Cassio pulled a second thing from the tin, a bar coaster, ancient, ringed with stains, some tavern's shamrock printed on it, and set it beside the photograph like evidence. The Falcons ran heroin through South Chicago and put it in schools. Your father spent 6 years building the case of his life. A ledger. Every payment, every cop they owned, every judge, every body. He wouldn't keep it at the precinct because half the precinct was in it. So he hid it and told no one where, not his captain, not me. His finger tapped the coaster once. This is from the last night I saw him. He was laughing. He tapped that watch he kept running 4 minutes fast and he said, Cass, the 4 minutes will save my life someday, and I said. He didn't finish it. His hand flattened on the table and stayed there, and the most feared man in Chicago stood looking down at a 30-year-old coaster with his shoulders set like a man taking weight. Vittorio Falcone found out the case existed before it could be filed, he said finally. Your father was dead 9 days later, and the ledger was never found. 15 years the Falcons have torn this city apart looking for it, because it is still the loaded gun against their heads. 15 years I've looked too, because it's the only thing on earth that can end them without a war. And 15 years I have had eyes on Tommy Quinn's daughter, every day of her life, because I promised him once, over trout and bad beer, that if it ever went wrong, I would. The scholarship, she heard herself say. The Meridian Foundation is a lawyer and a checkbook. My landlord dropped the lawsuit against my mother in Michigan. He was persuaded. The man who followed me home from the L in 2019, she stopped. They never found him. No, Cassio said, they never did. Her legs decided about sitting after all. She groped for the hearth and sat on the cold stone and pressed both hands over her mouth, and her whole biography turned over and showed her its underside. Every stroke of impossible luck in 15 unlucky years revealed as the fingerprints of the man standing in front of her. So the dinner, she whispered through her hands. The library the first night, girl who's never owned anything, the duster. You knew whose daughter I was the whole time, and you still thought. I knew whose daughter you were. Cassio came around the table slowly, and there was something in his voice she had never heard in it, that no one, she suspected, had heard in it, a man handing over the keys to his own failure. That is precisely the point, Nora. I knew your name, your school, your rent, your mother's address in Grand Rapids. 15 years of surveillance reports, and I read every one, and I filed you where grief files things, as something fragile I owed a dead man. stray to be fed at a distance. It never once occurred to me, not once in 15 years, that I wasn't standing guard over Tommy's daughter. He crouched to her level, the way she'd watched Renzo crouch, but his hands stayed on his own knees, asking nothing. I was standing guard over Tommy's heir, and I found it out the way everyone in my world finds out what you are, publicly, at my own table, with my own arithmetic in pieces on the floor. His mouth moved toward something that wasn't quite the laugh. He'd have paid money to see it. He always said the room would get me someday. I assumed he meant a gun. Bianca, Nora said through her hands. Did Bianca know? Was any of it real, or was I an assignment, was my whole? Bianca chose that seat in that lecture hall herself, Cassio said. That is the truth. What else my daughter knew, and when? And here something new entered his voice, a hairline fracture, is a conversation I have been putting off because I am no longer certain I know the answer, and there are very few things left on this earth that frighten me. Nora lowered her hands. The engagement. The engagement, Cassio agreed grimly, was Bianca's idea. She came to me 18 months ago and proposed peace with the family that killed her mother, and I said no, and she went to dinner with Dario Falcone that same week anyway, publicly, wearing red, and once it was public, my no was worth nothing. He turned to the window, to the lawn where the men who were not gardeners moved through the morning light. My daughter is either walking into that family as a sacrifice for peace, or she is up to something so dangerous I can't see the bottom of it. Her mother would have known which. Her mother was the only person Bianca never lied to. And the man in the boathouse. A Falcone soldier caught inside my wall 2 nights ago with photographs of your library, of your workspace. Cassio let that land and watched her, and she felt the last puzzle piece turn in her fingers, ice cold. Renzo asked him who has the ledger, and do you know what he said? He said, according to Dario, the daughter does, and he did not mean my daughter. The library was very quiet. Down on the lawn, a mower started, absurd, domestic. I don't have it, Nora said. Cassio, I was 11, I don't have it, I don't know anything. I believe you. His eyes didn't leave her. But 8 days from now, this house fills with Falcones for an engagement party, and they believe Tommy Quinn's daughter has been brought here to find their execution warrant. You see the position. You see why I told you to finish the painting and forget this house. And instead you told me everything. Yes. Why? He was silent for a moment. Then he reached out, the second time he had ever touched her, and turned her wrist over gently, so the old Hamilton faced them both, ticking its 4 minutes ahead of the world. Because I have been wrong about you twice, Cassio said. At my gate and at my table, I don't intend to be wrong a 3rd time. Your father hid the only weapon that matters in a place only patience could find. And then, Nora, God help us both, he raised the patience. She didn't run. That mattered to her after. She stayed and she worked, because her hands needed the ritual and because the library had become the theater of everything. And on the 5th day before the party, kneeling in front of the woman in silk with a cotton swab and 15 years of grief, patience found what it always finds. She was cleaning the lower left corner, the water damage, the bruise. Water came from behind, she told him the first night, from the wall side, over months, and it had nagged her ever since like a thread off a sweater, because the wall behind the chimney breast was an interior wall. There was no plumbing there. She'd checked the blueprints Renzo's office had provided with cold courtesy. No pipe, no roof leak, no reason. Damage tells a story. Her father used to say the same thing about crime scenes. She lifted the painting down herself, both hands, heart drumming, and turned it over on the padded work table, and looked at the back the way she should have looked weeks ago instead of falling in love in this room. The stretcher bars were period. The canvas was period. And the lining, the protective backing canvas glued over the original, was old, but the glue was not. The glue was animal glue applied 15 or 20 years ago in one careful campaign, and along the bottom edge where the water had crept in from behind, the lining had lifted just enough for her fingertip. Nora stopped breathing and worked the seam. Between the lining and the 400-year-old canvas, flat, wrapped in acid-free tissue by hands that had known exactly what acid does to paper over decades, sat a document envelope. And on the envelope, in ballpoint gone brown, in handwriting she still saw in her dreams, 4 words. For my Nora bird. Her legs took her down to the floor. She sat on the library rug with her father's envelope against her chest and cried the way she hadn't cried at 11 because she'd been too busy watching her mother do it. Huge, silent racking, both hands full of tissue paper and proof. He'd hidden it in the house of the man he trusted most. Inside the painting of the woman that man loved most, knowing it would never be sold, never be lent, never be touched, and knowing one thing more. Knowing that if the worst happened, his patient friend would keep watch over his daughter, and his daughter would grow, because it was already in her at 11, everyone said so, into exactly the kind of woman who ends up alone in a room with a dying painting. He hadn't hidden it from the world. He'd mailed it. 15 years through the only postal system he trusted, and she was the address. Inside, a ledger the size of a missile, and a letter, and she read the letter on the floor of Cassio Marchetti's library. And this is what the parts that matter said. If you're reading this, the 4 minutes weren't enough. The book buries the Falcons, everyone, and about 40 men with badges and robes, so be careful who you hand it to, baby. The list of people you can trust is short. Cass is on it. I know what he is. I knew what he was every day for 20 years, and I'm telling you, the accounting on that man comes out strange, but it comes out. If the world went wrong enough that you two ever met, then hear me. Trust Cass. Watch the quiet one who counts his money. And Nora Bird, one more thing, and I need you to hear it in my voice. Numbers lie 4 ways, ours lies fast. Watch the quiet one who counts his money. She sat very still on the rug. Renzo had been Cassio's consigliere for 22 years. Renzo had provided the blueprints. Renzo had asked the man in the chair who has the ledger, not where is the ledger, which was, she realized with her skin crawling, the question of a man who already knew it was in the house. A soldier had been caught with photographs of her workspace, and someone had let that soldier through a wall with 10 seconds of gate and 3 cameras and men in the flower beds. And the water damage that had led her here, was 15 years old and had come from behind, from inside the wall. From a copper line she now understood had been installed and quietly ruptured on purpose. Someone in this house had known roughly where the ledger was for years, and had been trying, with water and patience, to make the painting sick enough that it would finally be sent out for restoration, out through the gates, away from Cassio's sightline, into a workshop where it could be taken apart at leisure. And instead, Cassio had brought the restorer to the painting. Nora looked at the ledger. Then she did the arithmetic her father had left her. Numbers lie 4 ways, ours lies fast. Every page was salted, dates and account numbers shifted 4 forward, so any thief who tried to use it raw would hit dead ends and burned accounts, and only a Quinn, only the kid who'd grown up being quizzed on the 4-minute watch, could true it up. Even from the grave, her father had built a gun only she could load. She had 5 days, a dead man's arsenal, a traitor with silver hair, a best friend she could no longer read, and a heart that had gotten itself hopelessly, stupidly entangled with the boss of the Chicago outfit. Everything, in short, had become complicated. Bianca came to the library that afternoon, before Nora had decided anything. She stood in the doorway a long moment watching Nora work, red lipstick perfect, eyes bruised with sleeplessness, and then she came in and sat on the hearth uninvited and said, conversationally, "You found it, didn't you?" Nora's hands stopped. Found what? Nor, softly. You cleaned the lower left corner 4 days ago. You've re-cleaned it 3 times since. You keep swabbing paint that's already clean right over the water damage. You forget I've watched you work for 8 years. She looked up at the woman in silk, her mother's painting, and her voice came out thin as wire. Is it in the painting, all this time? Was it in my mother's painting in my father's house the whole time? And there it was, and there was no more filing system left to hide it in. How long have you known who I was? Nora said. The lecture hall, sophomore year, was it ever real? Bianca laughed, one broken note, and pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. I picked that seat because you were Thomas Quinn's daughter, she said. I stayed for 8 years because you're Nora. Both things are true. I know you'll only believe one of them tonight, and I know which one, and I've been dreading this conversation for 8 years, so. She spread her hands. Ask. The engagement. I'm going to marry Dario Falcone in September, Bianca said, and her eyes went flat and shining at once, a lake icing over. unless something ends his family first. My mother is in a chapel on the North Lawn because of his family. Your father is in Calvary Cemetery because of his family. My own father won't finish it because he's protecting me. He thinks peace protects me. So somebody in this house had to get close enough to the Falcons to find their throat, and it couldn't be him. So she took out her lipstick and reapplied it right there, hands perfectly steady now, that same red, and Nora understood at last that the red was not vanity. It was armor, it was war paint, it had always been war paint. You want the ugly version, Nora. The ugly version is that I found you on purpose, and I loved you by accident, and 18 months ago when I finally moved on Dario, I told myself I'd keep you clear of it, and then my father met you, and now you're in the middle of everything I built, and I can't tell anymore whether I recruited you or you happened to us. Fate has terrible manners. She stood, brushed off her dress, and paused at the door without turning. Don't tell my father what I am. Not yet. He'll lock me in a tower and go start his war and die in it. 5 more days. Whatever you found in that painting, I need you to be exactly what your father raised. Patient. So Nora carried one secret for each of them, the father's daughter to the last, and went looking for Cassio, and found him on the terrace in the dark, jacket off, tie gone, a man out of uniform. I found something today, she started. So did I, he turned. In the light spilling from the house, his face was stripped of all its careful architecture. Vittorio Falcone requested the seating chart for the party. My daughter's engagement, and the old man wants to know where everyone sits. That is not a wedding guest, Nora. That is a man planning fields of fire. He dragged a hand down his face. I've spent 5 days trying to build a version of next week where no one I love is in this house. There isn't one. And I am so tired of arithmetic. Cassio. When Alina died, he said, and then had to stop and start over. The bomb was for me, 11 years ago. She took my car to the florist because hers wouldn't start. The florist was 8 minutes away. 8 minutes, and I was in a meeting about concrete, about God, about aggregate ratios, and for 8 minutes the world still had her in it and I was arguing about. His voice hit something and went through it broken. I decided that day, never again. Never again does a woman stand where my life can land on her. 11 years I kept that decision, 11, and I kept it right up until a Tuesday in June when one climbed onto my hearth. So before you say whatever you came out here to say, understand that I have run the numbers on you 100 times, and they don't. There is no version where I have you and keep you breathing, and I. Stop deciding things for me, Nora said, and crossed the terrace and kissed him. For 1 second he went completely still, a man mid-detonation. Then his arms came around her like a verdict, one hand in her hair, the other flat against her back, and he kissed her the way he did everything, with total attention and terrifying patience, and the lake and the guards and the ledger and the whole armed world went very far away. When they finally broke apart, both of them unsteady, he rested his forehead against hers, breathing like a man who'd carried something heavy a long distance, and set it down. This is a catastrophe, he said hoarsely. I know. My daughter's best friend, Tommy's little girl. There is no version of this that isn't. I know, Nora said. It's completely complicated. Cassio, look at me. He did, and she took his hand and pressed it over the watch. 4 minutes fast. You want to keep me breathing? Stop protecting me and start arming me. I have something to show you in the library. And then we're going to have a very long night because I know how the Falcons die, and I know who's been holding the door open for them, and you're not going to like the second part at all. She told him everything except one thing. She showed him the envelope, the letter, the ledger, and she watched the most feared man in Chicago sit down slowly in his own library holding his dead friend's handwriting, and put his hand over his eyes. And be, for exactly 1 minute, not the most feared anything, only a man who had missed someone for 15 years. She showed him the salted numbers and the 4th shift, and watched the general come back online behind his eyes as he understood what her father had built. Then she told him about the water line, and the blueprints with the wall unlabeled, and the question that was who has instead of where is, and she watched 22 years of trust burn down behind his face in the space of 10 seconds, and what replaced it was cold, so cold. And when he stood and turned from the window, he was smooth and pleasant and terrifying, and she understood she was now looking at what the boathouse man had looked up at. Renzo, he said, will not be dealt with tonight. Cassio, if I take him tonight, the Falcons know we know and they don't walk into the party, and this never ends. It goes to the mattresses and men die in car parks for 10 years, and one of them eventually is me, and another one, because you are standing in my library at midnight, is eventually you. He shook his head slowly. No, Renzo stays exactly where he is, holding his door open, feeling clever, and we are going to walk our enemies through it. The one thing she didn't tell him was Bianca. The trap they built over the next 4 nights was a painting. Of course it was. Word was allowed to travel. Through a housemaid Renzo trusted who belonged, bones and all, to Cassio, that Miss Quinn had discovered something concealed in the old oil in the library, and that on Saturday night, after the toasts, Mr. Marchetti planned a private unveiling for both families. It was catnip laced with panic. If the ledger surfaced publicly, the Falcons died in courtrooms. Their only play was to take it before the unveiling, quietly, during the party, while the house was crowded and the security stretched, and Renzo would have to open the door one last time, personally, and lead them to the library himself. The library where the painting waited with an envelope behind its lining. The wrong envelope. Her father's tissue paper, lovingly refolded around 300 pages of salted, useless numbers, every 4th digit a landmine, while the trued ledger, the real gun, sat in the hands of a federal prosecutor named Acaffer, whom Nora met that Thursday in the back booth of a diner in Kenosha. A woman with tired eyes who went very still when she saw the handwriting and said, "I worked this case as a first year. We all knew Quinn had a book. 15 years. And then, looking up sharply, why now? Why me? Who sent you?" And Nora slid across the table a photograph of 2 young men on a pier with a stringer of trout and said, "Patient men." The nights of Trap Building were espresso at 3 in the morning, the 2 of them across the work table with the salted pages between them, and it should have been all business, and it refused to be. He watched her hands while she trued numbers the way he'd watched them over the canvas. Once, both of them reaching to turn the same page, her fingers landed on the back of his hand and stayed there 1 second too long, and neither of them moved, and the lamp hummed, and the whole house slept around them, and he turned his hand over slowly under hers so their palms touched, and they sat like that, not looking at each other, while the clock on the mantel counted, and then she said, unsteady, "Page 40. And he said, "Page 40. And they went back to work with their ears burning like teenagers. Another night, he fell asleep mid-sentence in the leather chair, the boss of the outfit, and she stood over him for a long minute, learning his face with the lamp off its guard, and put the throw blanket over him, and he caught her wrist without opening his eyes and pressed her knuckles to his mouth once and let go, and she walked back to her side of the table with her pulse ruining her handwriting. "It can't come from us," he'd said the first night. "The moment I use it, it's a mob document, gangland fantasy. My lawyers say it dies in a week. It has to come from clean hands publicly in a way no one can bury." "Then we don't bury the Falcons," Nora had said slowly, watching him over the rim of her cup. "We get them arrested, on camera, at your daughter's engagement party in front of society press you're going to invite tomorrow." And Cassio had looked at her for a long moment and then smiled, the real one, the banked fire, and said, "Tommy used to look exactly like that when he was about to ruin someone's decade, and it was the strangest and best compliment of her life." Then, 2 nights before the party, Dario Falcone caught her alone, and the plan nearly died in a boathouse. She'd gone down at dusk to the water to breathe, along the dock past the boathouse, and he stepped out of its doorway so smoothly he must have watched her the whole way down the lawn. Gray cashmere, glass of someone else's scotch. He didn't block her path. He did something worse. He fell in beside her like an old friend and walked her, gently, conversationally, off the dock and into the boathouse's gasoline dark, one hand hovering at the small of her back without touching, and the door stood open behind them and might as well have been a mile away. "Little mouse." He clicked on one work light. It swung, and the shadows of hulls and ropes tilted across his face and kept tilting. "Do you know what I did after that dinner? I made calls, all week calls, and here is what's funny. Nora Quinn from Pilsen, who fixes paintings, daughter of Margaret Quinn of Grand Rapids, and of Detective Thomas Quinn." He let the names swing with the light. "Organized crime, deceased. You wore a dead cop's watch to my engagement dinner in this house, And Marchetti stood you up in front of both families like a party trick, and you gutted 8 figures in 90 seconds, and he backed you before he'd walked the length of the table. So I'm going to ask you some questions now, and I want you to think very hard about the order I ask them in. Her heartbeat was in her ears, in her teeth. The door was 15 feet behind her. His men would be at both ends of the dock. She made herself pick up a coil of rope from the workbench as if tidying, because her hands needed a task or they would shake, and she needed him to see steady hands. Ask, she said, where is your father's ledger? 15 years dead and he's still more interesting than you. He'd have enjoyed that. She set the rope down. I was 11, Dario. I got a folded flag and a moving truck. If my father hid something, he didn't hide it in a child. No, Dario drank, watching her over the glass. He hid it in what the child would become. That's the theory going around. That's why you're here in that library in that house 2 weeks before my wedding. So, second question, what did you find in the painting? And there it was, the fork in the road. And afterward she would understand that everything, the trap, the party, all their nights of arithmetic, came down to this one unrehearsed moment in the gasoline dark. And what saved them was that she'd spent her whole life learning that authentic and fake are separated by boredom, by exhaustion, by the 3 brushstrokes where the hand stops performing. So she didn't perform. She let her shoulders drop. She let her voice come out flat and tired, and a little bitter, the voice of a woman confessing to smaller sins to hide a greater one. Yellowed varnish and a second-rate lining job, she said. And before you ask, yes, I checked behind the lining because I check behind every lining, it's the job. There's water damage and there's glue. That's what's in the painting. She looked at him and made herself do the hardest thing, made herself step toward him instead of away, close enough to smell the scotch. But you already know something's happening Saturday, the unveiling. You want to know what Marchetti found, and the honest answer is, I don't know, because he stopped telling me things the day I finished the cleaning. You saw what I am to him, Dario. You saw it at dinner before he ever said a word. The help performing, the car wash girl. Men like you and men like him don't hand the ledger of the century to the entertainment. She let the bitterness sit there, real, borrowed from every first of the month of her adult life, borrowed from the word duster. Whatever gets unveiled Saturday, I'll be finding out when you do. The work light swung. Dario studied her for a long, long moment, and she watched him do exactly what she'd done to his forged vernet, hunt the brushwork for the place where the hand was trying too hard, and find tired, and find bitter, and find the underpaid woman it had been so easy to laugh at, because contempt, in the end, was the flaw in his eye. Men like Dario could not authenticate what they had already decided was worthless. You know what my uncle says about you. He finished the scotch and set the glass on the workbench with a click. He says the mouse has a wolf's pulse. I told him he's getting old. He walked past her to the door and paused in it, backlit, and his voice came around the doorframe pleasant and dead. If I find out you lied to me tonight, I'll drown you off this dock myself, and Marchetti can fish you out. Sleep well, little mouse. She stood alone in the dark until his steps left the boards, and then she bent over the workbench and shook, both hands flat on the wood, the wolf's pulse hammering, and let herself have 30 seconds of it. And then she straightened up and walked back to the house through the dusk, because there were numbers left to true. She told Cassio all of it that night. He listened with his knuckles whitening around the espresso cup by degrees, and when she repeated the words the help, performing, and told him she'd used his own dinner against Dario as camouflage, he set the cup down very carefully and looked at her for a long time, and said, quietly, he believed it because I built it for him. I handed you the armor the night I tried to make you small. And when she got to the drowning line, the cup came back up in his hand and cracked, plainly, audibly, and he set the pieces down and stood at the window with his back to her for a while. Saturday, he said finally, he learns what the mouse found. Saturday came down golden and merciless. The estate filled with silk and press and 200 guests, senators' wives and steal money, and threaded through it, 40 armed men pretending to admire the roses. Bianca floated through it all in white and red, luminous, playing the bride so well it hurt to watch. Dario held her waist for photographs, king of the lawn. Old Vittorio toasted the joining of families with his restless hands, and his eyes moved over the house all night like a man checking exits. And at 9, when the quartet swelled and the dancing began under the tent, Nora stood at the edge of the light in a green dress with her father's watch on her wrist and felt the whole machine begin to turn. Cassio found her there. He didn't touch her, not with the lawn full of eyes, but he stood close enough that his sleeve brushed her bare arm, and it landed like a touch anyway. "Ackhafer's people are at the county road," he said quietly, lips barely moving, boss at his own party, smiling at guests. "The maid delivered her rumor. Renzo has checked his phone 11 times in an hour. Dario just sent 2 men toward the house to find the restrooms, which are, by an odd coincidence, in the direction of the West Wing." He inclined his head at a passing judge. "You could still walk down to the water and be nowhere near this." 4 minutes fast, Nora said. His mouth curved. "Then may I have the next dance, Miss Quinn? I'm told it will be memorable." The music turned. He led her out under the tent among 200 people and every rule they'd made, and they danced, boss and restorer, and for 3 minutes the plan and the guns and the 15 years fell away, his hand at her back, her pulse in her throat, the lights swimming. He danced the way he did everything. She stopped being able to tell her heartbeat from the music. And over his shoulder, mid-turn, she watched Renzo detach from the party and slip toward the house and take Dario Falcone and 4 men with him into the dark of the West Wing. "They're moving," she breathed. "I know," he turned her unhurried. "Never let them see you count." What happened in the library, Nora heard about afterward from 3 sources and assembled like a restoration, layer by layer. How Renzo let 5 armed falcons into the boss's own sanctuary and lifted down the painting with gloved and reverent hands. How Dario slit the lining with a pocket knife, tenderly, greedily, and drew out the tissue-wrapped envelope and read 4 words in browned ballpoint and laughed out loud. How they turned to leave and found the doorway full of Cassio Marchetti, alone, hands in his pockets, watching Renzo the way you watch the death of something you loved. 22 years, Cassio said. "What did they give you, Renzo? I want the number." To his credit, or whatever remained of him, the consigliere didn't grovel. He straightened his cuffs. "You stopped being ambitious 11 years ago, Cass. When Alina died, you started managing decline. A man has to think about his future." "His future," Cassio said. "Well." Then the windows filled with light, not muzzle flash. Floodlights, federal white, and the amplified voice out on the lawn calling the first names, and the sound of 200 guests and a string quartet discovering simultaneously that the party was surrounded, that marshals were on the county road, that Catherine Ackhafer had spent 48 hours with a dead detective's ledger and a grand jury on a Saturday, and that the indictments, sealed until 9:40 that evening, named 17 falcons and 4 public officials, and 60 seconds behind the marshals, every society reporter Cassio had personally invited was filming it all. Dario Falcone did not go quietly. Nora saw this part herself from 10 feet away, and it made every nightmare's short list. He came out of the house with a marshal's hand on him, into the floodlit chaos of the terrace, and she was there at the foot of the steps because she had run toward the house the moment the lights came up, toward Cassio, against the current of fleeing silk. Dario saw her. He saw the marshals and the cameras and the whole architecture of his ruin, and then he saw her, the car wash girl, the little mouse, standing in the light with a dead cop's watch on her wrist, and she watched him understand all of it at once, the boathouse, the tired voice, the bitterness she'd let him find because he wanted to find it, and his face came apart around the understanding. He wrenched free of the marshal. There was a gun in his fist from somewhere, and a scream went through the crowd, and he was not aiming at the marshals. He swung it past Nora like she was furniture, one last contempt, the flaw in his eye to the very end, and leveled it across the terrace at the man in the doorway, at Cassio, unarmed in the federal light. Nora was already moving. Not away. She had been 11 years old the last time this family took a man from her in the dark, and her body had apparently held a vote on the matter years ago without informing her. 2 steps, and she seized the thing nearest her hands, a magnum of champagne sweating in its bucket on the abandoned toast table, and she swung it up and hurled it, all shoulder, all 15 years, and it took Dario's outstretched arm at the wrist exactly as he fired. The shot went high and wide into the limestone, spraying dust, and he staggered, gun swinging back around toward her now, toward Nora, his mouth forming a word. The second shot cracked the night in half. It was not his. Dario spun and dropped, howling, clutching a shoulder that no longer worked, his gun skittering off into the dark, and every head turned toward the muzzle flash. And there on the lawn in her white dress stood Bianca Marchetti, feet planted like she'd been born on a range, both hands steady around a pistol that had spent the evening strapped under $12,000 of Milanese silk. The lawn went silent except for Dario, screaming into the grass. Bianca clicked the safety on, handed the pistol grip first to the nearest astonished marshal, and looked down at her fiancé with the flat lake ice eyes, and said, in a voice that carried to every corner of the tent, "The engagement is off." Then, into the ringing quiet, she found her father across the terrace, and her chin trembled once, 27 years old and 11 years old at the same time, and Cassio crossed the lawn through the marshals and the lights and the ruin of the party and wrapped his daughter up while she shook. And over her shoulder his eyes found Nora at the toast table, champagne foaming over the flagstones at her feet, and none of the three of them had a single secret left, and it felt like surfacing from deep water, painful. Necessary air. It took until 4 a.m. for the last vehicles to leave. Statements, lawyers, Akefer on the terrace with cold coffee saying, "I don't approve of a single thing about tonight." And then, quietly to Nora, "Your father would have loved every second of it." Renzo left in handcuffs. Vittorio left in an ambulance, his heart quitting on him in the arithmetic of ruin. The tent stood empty on the lawn with its lights still on, glowing like a beached moon. Nora found Bianca in the chapel, sitting in the front pew in her white dress with her shoes off, staring at her mother's fresh flowers. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Nora sat down beside her, and Bianca put her head on Nora's shoulder the way she had 100 college midnights, and said, in a small voice, "So, sophomore year, are we going to survive that conversation? You picked the seat on purpose." "I did." "You stayed on purpose, too." Bianca was quiet. Her hand found Nora's and gripped it, too tight, that same too tight grip from the hallway, and Nora finally understood it had never been a warning. It had been someone holding on. 8 years I knew what my family cost yours, Bianca said, wire thin. Every birthday, every time you cried over money, every time you talked about your dad, I kept thinking if I can just love her well enough, it counts as something. It doesn't work that way. I know it doesn't work that way. She lifted her head, mascara wrecked, war paint finally gone. You're allowed to hate me. But you should know the friendship was the only true thing I did in 8 years. And also, apparently, I have to tell you something horrifying, which is that my best friend is in love with my father, and I've watched it happen all month. And Nora, I swear to God, if you too think you've been subtle. The laugh came out of Nora sideways, half sob, in a chapel at 4 a.m, and then they were both doing it, laughing and crying and holding on, 2 women who had orbited a lie for 8 years and landed, somehow, on the same ground. You threw a champagne bottle at a falcon, Bianca said into her shoulder. You shot one. We are going to be impossible at parties now. Bianca pulled back and looked at her, and her mouth went soft and crooked, her mother's mouth, probably. It's a disaster, you know, him. He's ancient. He's impossible. He alphabetizes his enemies. Her thumb wiped under Nora's eye, an old gesture. He also hasn't been alive, not really, for 11 years, and this month I've heard him laugh in the library like someone left a window open in a sealed house. So. She stood, gathered her shoes, and paused at the end of the pew. Don't hurt him. He's the only father I've got, and I just shot my fiancé for the pair of you, and I'd hate for it to be a wasted evening. Dawn found Nora in the library because it was where she went, because it was where everything went. The painting hung back above the cold fireplace, lining Rasoon by her own hands, the woman in silk turning forever from her window, keeper of 15 years, mailbox of the dead. Cleaned now, luminous, saved. Cassio came in without a sound, tie gone, the night all over him, carrying 2 espressos and balanced on one saucer an orange. They didn't speak at first. He handed her a cup. They stood shoulder to shoulder looking up at Alina's painting in the gray light, and the house around them was silent in a way that felt, for the first time all month, like actual peace instead of held breath. Akefer thinks the trials will run 2 years, he said at last. The papers will drag every skeleton this family owns into the light. Some of it is worse than you imagine. I'm too old to pretend otherwise, and you deserve the arithmetic before you decide anything. He set his cup down and faced her, and the boss was gone, folded away, and it was only the man from the hearth, the one who didn't know what she cost. I was wrong about you twice, at my gate, at my table. A month ago, I'd have told you I don't survive being wrong, that being wrong is the one luxury a man like me is never permitted. And here I am, wrong twice, and alive because of it, and standing in the wreckage of my own arithmetic asking a 26-year-old restorer to. He stopped and breathed and chose the plain words. So decide, Nora. The gates open at 8. There's a car and a check for the restoration that has too many zeros on purpose, and a version of your life that goes back to Pilsen and never thinks about this house again. No one will follow you. I'll make sure of it. It would be the safest thing I ever did for you. He breathed once more. And it would take everything I have left. Nora looked at him for a long moment. Then she set down her own cup and picked up the orange and pressed it into his hands. One piece, she said. Show me. Outside, the sun came up over the lake and lit the abandoned tent gold. Somewhere in the house, Bianca was asleep in her ruined white dress. Somewhere in the city, 17 men were learning what a patient man's daughter could do. And in the library, under the woman in silk, Cassio Marchetti bent over an orange with the total attention of a man performing surgery, or sacrament, and the peel came away slow and unbroken, one long spiral curling down onto the worktable between them, and Nora slid her father's watch off her wrist and fastened it onto his, and set it, carefully, 4 minutes fast.